Now let's start with that phrase, DOrientalizing citizenship. Now, in the first symposium, that was in February of this year, 2012, we focused on the theme, opening the boundaries of citizenship. The overall name of the project, overall title is Citizenship After Orientalism, which we are going to also address more specifically during the roundtable. But within the rubric of Citizenship After Orientalism, in our first symposium, we focused on what happens when we open both epistemic and geographic boundaries of citizenship. Geographic boundaries of citizenship, opening those boundaries are clear enough in its implications. Many of us are familiar with the challenge that the nation states are presented with in the presence of migrations, trans-border activism, transcontinental international activism, and so on. So the opening the boundaries of citizenship is an easier one to have a grasp on. But the epistemic boundaries of citizenship is more complicated than the geographic boundaries. The epistemic boundaries of citizenship involves investigating or at least excavating the origins as well as the development of that political subjectivity that has been named as citizenship. It is more complicated than simply considering it upscaled version. Well, we used to have citizenship in the nation state. Now we have citizenship types, transnational citizenship, such as European citizenship, and so on. It is more complicated than that. It requires suspending for a moment the very idea of citizenship to understand the ways in which it politically has been instituted. The first symposium really addressed that issue of what happens when we begin to open the boundaries of citizenship in both those senses. Now, in this symposium, okay, I have one here already. This is for my left mouth, this is the right. So I can actually speak two. Should I hold it then? Yeah, can you hear me now better? Okay, I will hold it then. Then for this symposium, what we wanted to do, tighten the focus on particularly the issue of Orientalism and the relationship between Orientalism and citizenship. Now, when we use the term DOrientalizing citizenship, for some, of course, it will come as a news that there was ever a moment where citizenship was Orientalized in the first place. For those, we don't really have much to say, because the beginning point of this project, that in fact, there is a deep relationship between citizenship and Orientalism, and the ways in which we understood citizenship and constituted as a form of political subjectivity has already instituted an other against which it judged itself. Also, it judged the other forms of political subjectivity. To us, for the project, that's given. Now, the fact that it is given for the project doesn't mean that it is given in the mainstream sphere, as it were, if you like, or in the literature. So the relationship still needs to be problematized, still needs to be addressed, still needs to be troubled, the relationship between citizenship and Orientalism. But our problem is slightly different. And that notion of deorientalizing citizenship already indicates the difference of that problem. Of course, one difference is to cut into with that English prefix D, which has two senses. One sense of that D is in the sense of, I'm looking for a word, it's not cleansing, it's not purifying, but making something without it, that is removing certain elements from that which has already been constituted. But it has also other meaning of D in the sense of depriving of something that which it was available to itself. So when we talk about deorientalizing, it is an experiment. But it is not just merely a theoretical experiment. It is also paying attention to kinds of experiments people are undertaking by literally playing with their political subjectivities. So it is trying to, this term deorientalizing citizenship, is trying to capture that two senses of what might it mean, what might citizenship as political subjectivity look like if, in fact, we begin to deorientalize it. It is an ambitious undertaking. It is not merely theoretical, but it is not just merely empirical either. It is also a political project. And it is that, in that sense, it is a complicated project. Now, with this project, Citizenship After Orientalism, we don't have the sense that we are going to be actually answer a question that we posed. It is going to satisfy us if we can articulate the question well enough to invite others to join the project of thinking about citizenship after Orientalism. So it is not a question of finding answers to questions that we might pose, but articulating the question. That's the other sense in which we use also the experiment. It's not only paying attention to those people who are playing with their political subjectivities creatively and inventively, but also what does it mean in the academic space to play with citizenship creatively and inventively, experiment with it. It is that play that we are bringing into being, as it were. Now, just to give you a sense of how do we do this, I want to give you also an image of our day-to-day activities. We began in earnest working together in the beginning of 2011, and since 2011 February we have held about 60 meetings. Each of these meetings are day long, so all day we meet. Those are called Oecumene days, and weekly, and in those Oecumene days we do various different things. So the whole day is not a homogeneous one type of meeting, but it has different components. It could involve, for example, a report from a field work. It could involve addressing a theoretical issue. It could involve a particular research method issue. It could involve rehearsal of a research presentation that one of us is going to give. It could involve solving a particular empirical problem. It could involve reading a particular piece and discussing. And in certain days, in fact, many of these take place on a given day. Now, just to give you an overview of the kind of projects that are taking place and the kinds of fieldwork reports that we discuss, I'm going to go through each of the researchers and how I understand the particular problem that they're addressing. I should add that I have phrased it in my own way. They probably would phrase it in a different way. And I will come back to that tension that exists, creative tension that exists within the project, precisely because there is no singular way of addressing the question of how does one go about thinking about citizenship in a deorientalized way, or how does one articulate the question of citizenship after Orientalism. There is no single way of entry into articulating that question. Because of that multiplicity, because of that inherent plurality of the problem, then there are tensions of the way in which we address it. For example, Alessandra particularly focuses on how the struggles of indigenous Adivasi people in India are enjoined by acts of writing. Of course, in each of these projects, I can go on speaking for several minutes, if not more, but I'm going to be very disciplined, just making them short so that you get a sense of them, at least in the way in which I articulate. Andrea looks at how ambiguities of being European can be seen at the mirror of Orientalism. Aya investigates how the so-called religious institutions in India called matas enact forms of political subjectivity that are scarcely recognizable from within Western political categories. Dana looks at how the so-called non-ideological settlers in Israel are enacting neoliberal forms of colonialism. Dina investigates how Arabic traditions of storytelling are as political as Western forms of truth-telling, if not more subversive. Iker investigates how Orientalizing citizenship proceeds not only elsewhere, but through creating new edges of Europe. Jack looks at how creating settler political subjectivities is different from both the colonizer and the colonized political subjectivities in especially British colonial discourse. Laetitia investigates how sexual difference that has been enacted in a particular way in the metropole is now creating new forms of Orientalizing in the new colony. Lisa investigates how Muslim women in Britain are enacting a hybrid British Muslim family law. Tara investigates how the Hijra in India as the sexualized other constitute themselves as political subjects. And Zaki investigates how the politics of difference management in the metropole has its origins in the colony. Now you can hear quickly the kinds of projects that we are undertaking. Two things must strike you. One, there is something that brings them together, but it's not quite clear what that thing is because they're so broad. And on the other hand, the other thing that must strike you is that how spread these are and how on earth it is possible to bring them under a particular theme, particular rubric. Of course, bringing them together under a particular rubric would have been immensely difficult if I had been a positivist, if you like, if I wanted to impose a particular homogeneity on them, if I were interested in imposing a particular narrative that would be consistent over time, that would have certain coherence. But coherence, homogeneity, imposition are not particular values that I work with when I'm undertaking research. So I'm relieved of those concerns, but I am troubled by other ones. Just because I'm relieved of certain concerns doesn't mean that I am not troubled. I am troubled by not so much a homogeneity that they may acquire or certain coherence that they may acquire at certain point, but I'm more concerned about how these projects actually can provide a means to cut into articulating that project citizenship after Orientalism, that they actually amount to something more than the sum of their parts, that there's certain, at a meta level, not necessarily homogeneity, but at a meta level, they collectively indicate ways in which they can cut into the question of citizenship after Orientalism. Now, we have put together a Citizenship Studies special issue drawn from these projects, along with also drawn from some projects that were submitted to the first symposium. And when we published that, when I was writing the introduction to that particular special issue, which we will talk about tomorrow, I was exercised by this question of how these together actually allow someone who's never been exposed to the question of citizenship after Orientalism an inroad into thinking about citizenship differently. And I have come up with 3 things that collectively these projects do. Of course, these 3 are by no means exhaustive. I'm sure there will be other ones that will be added to what they collectively amount to or what they pose as a challenge. But these 3 at the moment are the ones that present themselves, at least to me, as being the contribution of this collective thinking that we are engaging. Those 3 I have ended up naming as undoing, uncovering, and inventing citizenships in the plural. Now, undoing is a project where we need to settle the grounds on which the very solid idea of citizenship rests. Settling the grounds means more than being critical of exclusion and exclusion. Settling the grounds of citizenship more than enacting a particular narrative where inclusion of ever more differentiated people to the happy family of citizenship. It is not that project. Shaking the grounds of citizenship means shaking the grounds of the very meaning of what we mean by and what we understand political subjectivity and political subjects. What political subjects are instituted as political? What subjects do have the right to claim that political subjectivity for themselves and to articulate themselves in ways in which the instituted forms of politics does not recognize them? It asks these difficult questions. That's one of the tasks, I think, the project begins to make a difference in what I call undoing of citizenship. The second one is uncovering. Undoing is still slightly different than the project of critique, if you like. It's not critique, as I already indicated. Of course, we can have a discussion about that, the ways in which critique is understood, the ways in which critique has been inherited in social science and humanities. But I would want to insist that it is not a task merely of critique of citizenship, undoing citizenship. It is simultaneously theoretical, empirical, and political project of unsettling the grounds on which a particular idea of political subjectivity rests. Even then, it's not enough to unsettle the project of citizenship or the idea of political subjectivity. So then the second one comes into play, as it were, uncovering citizenship where previously we did not think citizenship exists. Uncovering then is a mode of approaching this question, is digging in various places, bringing into light various forms of subjectivities, and demonstrate how people are being political. People are articulating certain claims. People are articulating different ideas about the rights and entitlements and subjectivity. And yet in social science and humanities, especially in the metropole, in the Western hemisphere, if you like in the Northern hemisphere, we don't have the ways and means to recognize, understand, even record these kinds of subjectivities. So uncovering them itself is, of course, massively difficult undertaking. Clearly, it cannot even be undertaken, let alone one scholar, but even a group of scholars. It has to expand its circuit by various forms of invitation, and it certainly cannot involve only those who are located in the north and the western spheres of academic establishment, as it were. It has to also open its boundaries, epistemic boundaries and geographic boundaries, to locate these subjectivities. So therefore, the second task, the uncovering task, is just as demanding and challenging as the first task, perhaps even maybe more so. Yet that's not still enough, and that's not still deep enough a challenge, as it were. A third way in which various projects come into the question of Orientalism has to do with also inventing. Now, inventing is a really important category of approaching citizenship. Inventing in the sense that it does not really begin with precedents. It does not necessarily begin with always already established categories of what citizenship might look like. But in fact, precisely because it is able to undo and uncover different forms of political subjectivities, it begins to give primacy to people's experiments in political subjectivity, how various different forms of being political and becoming political are articulated in different spheres, and what those experiments in political subjectivity are articulating, what forms of subjects they're bringing into being, what kinds of subjects, both in the sense of agents, but also issues and topics, the content of rights and entitlements. Now, let me say a few things about now the next couple of days. We are going to extend, obviously, this conversation today and tomorrow, especially around the roundtable. And we are going to come back and revisit these categories. Over the next 3 days, roughly, they don't follow, we have 3 panels. They don't necessarily follow the logic of the 3 ideas that I've outlined, but there are elective affinities between these 3. What we're going to do in the first panel this morning, Citizenship, Colonialism, and Orientalism, we're going to revisit these relationships. Like I said, undoing citizenship is not a one-off event. I have 2 minutes left. So, speeding up, in the 2 minutes, the first panel, we are going to look at the relationship between citizenship, Orientalism, and colonialism. And then we are going to shift the gear, if you like. And in the afternoon, we are going to address a more challenging question in association with the first question, the relationship between democratizing politics and decolonizing citizenship. I haven't had time to really address the relationship between decolonizing and deorientalizing projects. And with the keynote today, later today, we are going to have an opportunity to discuss that. And finally, in panel 3 tomorrow, we are going to look at the question, what happens to the universal after Orientalism? Now, let me just thank people who have made this possible. Obviously, I'm not going to thank specifically the members of the research group whom I already mentioned with the research projects that they're undertaking. The greatest thanks go to them. Without their hard work, both here in the UK and out there in fieldworks, without that work, without their commitment and passionate engagement with the questions that we articulate together, none of this would be possible. So I really thank them and grateful to their commitment and dedication to the project and its principles. But also I want to thank Lisa and Rada, who have just been magnificent in taking care of all the details that go together, not only just putting together an event like this, but as I mentioned, we have met some 60 times, and maybe even more. I was looking at my notes, maybe it's 80 times, but only 60 of them involved all of us. Whatever the numbers, considerable amount of project management and administration skills go into as ambitious a project as this one. And so Lisa and Rada, who cannot even hear me thank them because they are busy, of course, making sure that the event goes smoothly. And I would like to thank also today for all the speakers who have invited so kindly our invitation to join the conference. They have indicated not only they want to come and talk about their work, but with their abstracts, they have indicated that they have creatively engaged the problems that we presented to them, theoretical, intellectual problems. And I'm looking forward to hear each and every one of them over the next 2 days. I would like to thank also chairs for agreeing to chair these panels. It's considerable responsibility and anxiety to chair panels of prominent speakers. And finally, I would like to, of course, thank you for answering our call in more ways than one. We have a very strong presence of our publics. They are not just simply those who present themselves in bodily terms. When we organize something, they show up. They come with both their bodies and minds, and we are grateful for that. We are grateful for knowing each and every one of you and your work. But also, in one way or another, you are part of a network or various publics that we are creating, and we have ongoing relationship with you. And we cherish and cherish that relationship and want to invest also more in that. So I think that pretty much takes care of all the remarks that I wanted to make this morning. Without further ado, I'm going to call now Zaki to chair the first session. Thanks very much.